Welcome back to RotoQL University. It's our NBA strategy course. Today we'll be talking about handling injuries in daily fantasy NBA. Sahil, I know this is a big topic for you as you're one of the more skilled players in this realm. Excited to talk about it?
Yeah, no, I think it's very, very important. I think if you want to have any type of success with DFS, you really want to focus on injuries and how to impact your teams.
Awesome. Let's get started.
Yeah, so let's just go into a quick overview of the key things. Um, obviously, when there are players injured, the backups are going to get more minutes and get more opportunities to score. Um, Players that will only play 15 minutes will play 30 minutes. Some of the stars, too, can create more value because they'll be playing more minutes, too, likely, but obviously not as much increases you'll see from the backups, and they'll have higher usage. And then as well, you'll allow you to increase the budgets for your stars because you're going to get some really good value plays for cheaper prices. So this is something that we've talked about extensively, but there's a very, very clear correlation between minutes played per game and fantasy points per game. You'll see that this is about as good a correlation as you're ever going to see. And that just means you want to ensure that our players are playing and playing lots of minutes. And that one way that you can kind of confirm that your players are going to play a lot is if there's not a lot of injuries and not a lot of deaths that are almost forced to play. So, yeah, it obviously depends on which player is being injured. If it's a LeBron James, it's going to be a lot different than if it's Chris Paul, even though both are studs. And then when you kind of have injuries to someone that's kind of a mid-tier or an average starter, there's going to be definitely different effects. One thing that is when an average player is going to get injured, a backup is going to pick up a good portion of the minutes and can almost match production. You'll see that a lot, especially when obviously there's not that much a skill differential between the starter and the backup. One situation that always jumps out to me is the previously the Atlanta Hawks point guard situation. Jeff Teague's a pretty good player. Dennis Schroeder's also a pretty good player. So when Jeff Teague is out, Dennis Schroeder's going to pick up most of his minutes and also going to come with matches production. My bad. And then when the star players are injured, you're going to see definitely a different effect. Russell Westbrook comes to mind when Durant has been injured. Russell Westbrook plays like a superstar. While the backup, like an Anthony Morrow or Kyle Singler, whoever they said put in, really does not pick up too much. A large part depends on the players around him and what his exact role in the team. Backup point guards are generally going to be better, safer plays than backup wing players. Finding injury sources is a very complicated task historically, but now as DFS has grown bigger and more popular, there's a ton of resources that you should follow. One of is definitely follow us, RotoQL Basketball Monster, Fantasy Labs definitely has a good Twitter account to follow. And I definitely focus on Twitter as one of the main sources, but if you look at the QL Wire, RotoWire, RotoGrinders, you're all going to find a bunch of good sources. And then most importantly is in the last minutes before lock, you're really going to get the best information from Twitter. And then as you can see, you'll be able to use RotoQL to kind of help you kind of build lineups very, very quickly, especially when lineup information and injury information breaks kind of late and close to lock. So let's just take a quick example of a lineup that this is a almost pretty common thing that you'll see is multiple players from my cash game, especially once you get past the first month, are going to include backup players or players that are significantly boosted by injuries. You can see Tony Douglas here for a very cheap salary. Did not put up a monster game, but 25.5 points is more than enough to pay off his salary. In that situation, as the Hornets or the Pelicans, my bad, had a lot of injuries this past year, so that was a situation that a lot of players took advantage of. And I also had Alexia Jinsa, another backup, has very high usage, cannot stay out of foul trouble, but again, putting up close to 30 fantasy points for a salary that's very close to minimum is really going to set you apart. Derek Williams, another player that played quite a bit, especially when Carmelo was out this year, has a very high usage. Probably not that good an actual NBA player, but can definitely be a good fantasy asset for your team. So let's dive a little bit more deeper on how you can react to some of the injuries. DraftKings late swap is very useful, especially if you have a minute or two to change your teams. Ideally, you can't use all the salary cap depending on the positions. It's not ideal, but sometimes it's the only option you have. It's better to use kind of a lineup optimizer, change some teams by hand, but in the crunch, definitely use a late swap. And now DraftKings has an edit entry feature that you can use kind of a spreadsheet to edit your lineups. And if you're able to, I think this is something that you can definitely use. So let's just talk about some of the things I do on game day, which is pretty much every day, especially for NBA. So one thing you'll definitely want to be abreast of what the injury situations are early in the day. And you constantly have to be monitoring what happens on Twitter, all the other websites, all the things that we mentioned before. And then when 6 and 7, you'll get more and more information about who's going to be playing and who's not going to be injured. And then at that point, I'll be constantly tweaking my lineups to figure out what are the best places I can take advantage of this injury information. And in the case of injuries potentially happening, how can I swap into them correctly? So sometimes you'll have a player in a late game who's 50-50, and you'll have a great value play that will open up. You might want to think about constructing your lineups in such a way that you'll be able to swap into playing that player while upgrading another position. So making sure that you construct your lineups in terms of having the players that lock earliest first are in the non-utility spots, so you can get the maximum flexibility. You never want to use a utility spot for the first player, a player from the first game of the night. That is just something foolish and takes a little bit of time to fix. And then continuously, I'll be monitoring injuries on Twitter and try to use late swap and other methods to make sure that I'm doing the best I can. Yeah, so this is a little more about what we talked about. Maybe have two different lineups that you say that if you're going to be playing on DraftKings, especially if an injury happens, this is what the swap would be. So if Durant is going to be injured, I'm going to swap to Westbrook and Anthony Morrow, for example. Whereas if the injury doesn't happen, then I'll play two players from another game. But if you're able to kind of take advantage of that, you'll definitely put yourself in a favorable situation. As I said, don't use any players locked in the util spots until as late as possible. So again, let's take a look at another lineup example. This one I had Mario Hezonja Obviously did not put up a great point total. But again, this was someone who was getting a spot start. Scott Skiles is kind of an ass and doesn't play his players as much as he should. But definitely burned me here, but I still think it's a good play. And then you see that I picked two of the Phoenix Suns. They were down some of the big men, and both Len and Teletovic were getting a lot of minutes when Chandler was out. So I targeted both of them, and both aren't cheap players, but they're kind of mid-tier players that are going to play closer to a low-level star type performance when they get the minutes and opportunity. So doesn't always have to be the spot starter, but someone that's going to benefit from more usage and more minutes, which was the case with these Phoenix bigs. So definitely, again, take advantage of all the resources here. Check out the QL Wire and all our other videos on RotoQL University.